Oh, hi guys. So today I'm going to be giving you guys some tricks and some suggestions when using the DJI Ronin SC, specifically for time lapses. So one of the coolest features that this thing has, which I think might be the best feature set wise in any gimbal right now, are the motion time-lapse settings. So from what I've seen online, a lot of the other gimbals that are competing with this one don't have as reliable of an app or anything, don't offer some of the versatilities that this offers. So I figured, since I've been playing with this for a little while, doing some time lapses, I might as well make a video and show how I do it. In this part of the video, I'm just going to talk about hardware. So obviously you'd want a DJI Ronin SC or a Ronin S. They both work very similarly. On top of that, you don't want a camera setup that's too light. So with gimbals, I noticed that they go two ways. So you can either go too light with them or too heavy. The camera I'm recording on right now, that you see me through, is the A6000, and this is the A6300. Found the A6000, especially with that little kit lens it comes with, just to be far too light for this thing, and it's possible to use it, especially if you add some weight to it, but I find that you have to kind of trick the gimbal into working because it won't properly balance with that setup. Mostly in this axis it won't balance properly. I just find it to be less reliable. You really want to use a camera that's 800 to maybe 800 grams altogether. Right now I have this Nikkar 50D, which is just a nifty 50, it's manual focus with an adapter. A very important thing I found out that is good to have for time-lapsing is a good ND filter. If you shoot at too high of a shutter speed, just like video, you're going to introduce jitteriness. So the rule of thumb that works for me is that instead of, you can't really follow the whole shutter angle rules that you would with just normal video, because it can be a little impractical. What I do is I kind of shoot somewhere in between, like at the highest end, 1/50th of a second, and all the way down where it works. So if you're doing like a time lapse in the daytime, it might be very difficult for you to get anything close to 1/50th or lower, especially if you decide you want to shoot at like f1.8, even sometimes at f like 3.5 or f5.6, you might still find that it's just not feasible to get the shutter speed right. With a good variable ND filter, this will allow you to just keep your shutter speed where you want it, which would ideally be a slower shutter speed, as well as your f-stop number where you want it. So depending on what kind of time-lapse you're doing, you might want to emphasize a specific subject, or you might want to have certain things out of focus, which can definitely lead to a better product, especially if you have a very busy scene. This allows you to shoot, like I can shoot at f1.8 with this K&F SD30 variable ND filter. I think it does 4 stops of darkening. I can definitely shoot at about f1.8 during the daytime of this. Sometimes I might have to bring it down to f2.8 still, but it's definitely a lot better than what I was doing a few weeks ago, where I would do a time lapse and I'd be shooting at like f11, f12, which was just not fantastic. To make sure that you have a good cell phone battery, have it fully charged, because I personally like to keep the app open and monitor it, but I have this sneaking suspicion that if your phone were to die or if the app were to crash, it might stop doing the time lapse. So I just always make sure that I charge my battery or my phone fully before I go out with this thing. Let's go and edit a time lapse I made earlier. Welcome to my desktop. So I'm just going to quickly give you some ideas of how you can edit. So the first thing I always suggest doing is shooting in RAW and making a RAW sequence folder. So as you can tell here, these are all of my raw images and their accompanying metadata files. And then once you've edited your images, you should put them in a JPEG sequence folder. Now obviously these time lapses can be pretty sizable, so you can tell here. So you can totally, if you want to, delete them when you're done. That really depends on whether or not you want to have the full quality time-lapse storage or not. But it's always a good idea to separate your files anyway so that they're easy to import into Premiere Pro. So as you can tell here, I have a JPEG sequence as well, and to make the JPEG sequence, what I do is I first use a piece of software called LR Timelapse. So I'll browse until I find the raw image sequence for the camera. Then I'll set a keyframe, so you can tell here. In this case I chose 1, but you can choose as many as you want depending entirely on the type of clip you have. So if you're noticing that your clip is changing a lot through the scene, say a sunset, maybe it would be very bright in the beginning, and then by the end it might be very dark. You might want to have 2, 3, or 4 keyframes so that you can adjust how the image looks throughout the time lapse. Usually for time lapses where I'm keeping the same settings, I'll usually have 1 or 2 keyframes. That very much depends on how you use your software, and I definitely suggest that you watch some tutorials on LR Timelapse. It's a fantastic software. It's pretty simple. So after I'm done doing that, I'll click Save, and then I drag that into Lightroom. So as you can see here, then once it's imported into Lightroom, you're going to have some filters here. So right now we're looking at the entire sequence. If you go right here, we'll go and see only our keyframes, which I did 1 for this sample. As you can tell here, let me just reset this so we can have an idea. So it's basically just how you would edit a photo. From there, you're going to go back to your library, go into here, or metadata, and you're going to click Save to File. Once that's saved, you go back into our Timelapse, you click Reload, you click Auto Transition, and then you can do a visual preview after that, which is going to give you an idea of how the time-lapse is going to look. And then if you're noticing you have flicker in your shot, you can use the visual deflicking option. Now, I'm not going to get into this today. Go back into Lightroom, go to your library, go to Full Sequence. From here, I select all of my images, and then I'll go and right-click them, go to Metadata, go to Read Metadata from File, and then it's going to load all of the metadata information from the keyframe, or keyframes, onto the images. And you can do this on a project like this. I could have very easily probably done this all within Lightroom itself, but when you have multiple keyframes with different settings, this will allow you to transition each shot perfectly with which you can't do easily manually within Lightroom. So after that's reloaded, you just export them, and you can put that into your JPEG folder, which I explained before, and then from there we'll open up Premiere Pro, and then in Premiere Pro we'll just click on our project box, we click our first JPEG image, we click Image Sequence, we import the footage, and you're going to get something that looks along the lines of this. So from here, it's important to go to Modify and Interpret Footage. Now, this is where you choose what you want your frame rate to be. I generally suggest that if you're working on a larger video project that you keep this the same frame rate. It just means that you'll be using all of your images and you won't be losing out on information. So in our case, during this video tutorial, we're shooting at 29.97 FPS. I generally suggest shooting at 24 FPS and doing your time lapses in 24 FPS, but because the camera is set up for 30 FPS and because my screen recorder is set up for 30 FPS, that's what we're doing today. So once you're done that, you can go to File, New, go to Sequence. From here, you can choose your resolution. So my camera can't quite do 8K or anything like that. So I generally will shoot in 4K for my time lapses. We'll just call this sample time lapse. From there, I'll just drag it in, and we're just going to click Keep Existing Settings. So from here, we can click on our little view panel here. If you need to, go down to like 10%, and this is where we size it. So in most cases, your video or your time lapse is going to be larger than the actual sequence resolution, so it's important that you frame that the way you want to. So I might go and look down here and see how I'm framed in this particular video. So I might just click Shift. So after that, we're going to go to Sequence, and we're going to click Render Into Out. Once that's done rendering, you'll get a little green line above your sequence. That just means that you've pre-rendered everything. And that allows us to have a look at our time-lapse without it being laggy. Obviously, your experience may vary. I generally will have to pre-render my time-lapse sequences just because the images have a lot of information and it's a pretty high bandwidth kind of thing to do. So I'll just pre-render it and then it'll run smoothly for me. And as you can see here, it looks pretty good, but as you can probably see, there's a little bit of movement in it that we might not necessarily want. And if we want to fix that, Premiere Pro gives us a very useful tool that'll allow us to fix this. So if we go to Effects and then we type in Warp, you'll see down here that we have Warp Stabilizer. So you just take this, you drag it onto the clip in question, and then you're just going to let that process. I find with time-lapse in particular, a lot of the time the default settings for Warp Stabilizer seem to work pretty well. Obviously, there will be times where you might have to change the smoothness or anything like that. However, because this is not a video per se, it's a sequence of individual frames, I noticed that you don't need to worry so much about distortion and things like, obviously you don't have to deal with rolling shutter. Meaning that a lot of the times Warp Stabilizer finds it very easy to stabilize time-lapse footage, so long as it's not too shaky, obviously. And in our circumstance, it wasn't too shaky, it was just some jitteriness. So if we, now that we've pre-rendered that, let's have a look and see what the default settings for Warp Stabilizer actually can do. So as you can see, this is significantly smoother than it was otherwise. And I hear a lot of the time people are having issues with the DJI Ronin and getting smooth time lapses. Obviously, it would be really fantastic if you didn't have to do that, but so long as you're using Premiere Pro, it's not complicated at all to fix it, and it will make some incredible time lapses. So I definitely hope that this video was insightful for you. I definitely have been experimenting a lot with the motion time-lapse settings on the Ronin SC, and I found it to be both incredibly useful but also a little frustrating to set up, and I think that maybe somebody could use some of the useful little tricks I found. I do plan on making some videos more about the app itself, as well as maybe setting up the gimbal. I also think that maybe me even going into one of the more complex time lapses that I do might be interesting for you guys to see, either as a kind of tutorial video or maybe as a vlog kind of deal. I definitely am excited to start these video series. I think that the Ronin S was an interesting little investment I made, and I think that it could make some interesting YouTube content. So this is my first YouTube video on this channel, and I definitely want to say that the sub, if you want to, is definitely welcomed. And I hope you guys have a good day. Peace.